Chapter 12. Incentives. It was her. Power strike me to death right then and there. It was her. The most beautiful girl I'd ever seen, again. Not that I'd seen many, stood in my doorway. She was so tall she reached my height with those long, thin legs, and that rich red hair fell past her shoulders. The dark freckles on her blotched and gray face looked like they winked back at me, but that could have just been my imagination. Her full lips parted a bit as she bore her gaze into mine. My mouth had to be as wide open as the bedroom door, and as dry as a sandbox in my faction house's backyard. "Don't just stand there and gawk, you idiot. Say something." "I remember you. You're the girl I met on the road on my conception day." "It's Gorin, correct?" No doubt my whole body would crumple to the floor if somebody put as much as a leaf on my head. She remembered my name. "Yeah, and you're Stasha, right?" Like I'd forget hers. "That's correct." "I can't believe," I was about to say, "I'd ever see you again," but I instead said, "You're here." Thank power I caught myself. Would have been so embarrassing. She smiled, and I could have sworn some part of my body melted. "I could say the equivalent for you. Who's—" She pointed at Marv. "Oh, right. That's Marv." He stood and folded his arms across his chest. "That's right, Marv's the name. You're lucky you didn't hurt my friend Gore, man, or I would have had to pull my moves on you." He pumped a couple of fists in the air. "I'm one tough warrior, I'll tell you that." "Warrior? Seriously? Where did he get this stuff?" The smile stayed on Stasha's face. "I'm aware. I could tell by the way you were cowering on the floor." "That was just my fighting stance," he said. "The killer Marv crouch, I call it. It's one mean ditty, man." "Ditty?" Stasha tilted her head. "That's a type of song, you know." "Whatever, man. It's pretty nasty. That's all I'm gonna say. It's a pleasure to meet you, too." Her smile grew wider, and wings flapped in my stomach again. Funny how she could be so fierce one second, and then so light-hearted and fun the next. Even funnier I could notice that just after having my life threatened. "How'd you know we were here, and where'd you come from?" I asked. "Well, first of all," she said, "you guys were as boisterous as the plague." "Boisterous?" I asked. "Sorry, it means loud, right?" She'd used big words when we talked near the reproduction faction. No idea where she could have learned them, though. "I heard you dragging your feet all the way up the drive. Then the multiple creaks when you stepped on the porch steps, followed by the bang when the screen door shut. And regarding your second question, I came from the barn. I sleep there. Lots of hay. Very soft." "Why didn't I think of that?" I asked, as Marv said, "Makes sense." I glanced at him. He openly gaped at Stasha, eyebrows slightly raised. Unbelievable. Not that I could blame him with someone that pretty, but still. "So those shoes by the door must have been yours," I said. "That's correct," Stasha said. "I leave them in the house at night. I adore the sensation of the grass and hay on my bare feet." Her expression grew rigid. "In any case, I believe I've already laid claim to this farmhouse. However, there are plenty others in the area, any of which ought to suit both your and Marv's needs." My heart shrunk to the size of a pebble. She didn't want us around. She didn't want me around. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. She'd kind of acted that way when I met her by the reproduction faction. She'd clearly wanted to talk with me, but was uncomfortable and wanted to jet at the same time. "That might be true," I said, "but this house is pretty big. More than big enough for the three of us. Don't you think it'd be better if we band together? It'd be nice to have the company, and we could help each other survive." Marv unfolded his arms from his chest. "Sure sounds good to me, man. I can offer my warrior skills in case we're attacked by the patrol or any of the savage tribes, or some other force that seems unstoppable." He pumped his fists in the air again. "I'm one mean ditty, I'll tell you that." It took all my willpower not to groan, not just because of his ridiculous warrior talk, during which I couldn't have helped but picture his trembling little legs as he snuck by the patrol officers back in town, but because he managed to use the word ditty wrong even after Stasha told him what it actually meant. Deep creases lined Stasha's forehead. "Well, don't get me wrong. While it's certainly a nice notion, I don't think it's such a good idea. You both seem pleasant enough, but like I said, I think it's for the best that we go our separate ways. There's enough farmland for all of us here." It looked like she mustered the biggest smile she could, but something about it was off, as if someone created it by slopping a bunch of paint on her face. What was up with her? But why? I asked. You haven't really given us a good reason. It just didn't make any sense. Who'd want to live all by themselves in some run-down farmhouse on the outskirts of Middleton? She rocked her tall, thin body from side to side, clasped and unclasped her hands. I glanced at Marv, who stared at Stasha with eyebrows raised. Well, you know, because... She squinted as if she could read, and the rest of her sentence was scrawled across the far wall. Because why? I bore my gaze as hard as I could into hers. At last the paint on her face washed away, and her expression grew hard. Because we're less likely to be detected by the patrol if we split up. But the way she ended that statement, more like a question, betrayed the fact that she didn't believe it. That might be true, I said, but I'd personally rather get caught and hanged by the patrol than live the last of my days all by myself. Come on, why don't we at least talk and get to know each other better? Just a little. Then you could decide if you still want to be on your own. What do you say to that? She stared at me, her perfect lips pinched so hard they morphed white. Marv smiled and nodded. My friend's a wise man. You could say he's one mean ditty, too. I mustered the warmest smile I could to match Marv's. Just talk with us for a bit. We'll tell you our story and you can tell us yours. She blinked a couple times, then swallowed. All right, very well. Why don't we head downstairs and sit at the kitchen table? It looks like it's about to disassemble into a million pieces, but it's surprisingly stable. Thank power. But seriously, what had that been about? Stasha turned around and headed toward the door, and Marv blinked and shook his head real fast a few times, like he'd just been crudely wakened from a long sleep. Clearly he found Stasha as incredibly attractive as I did. After we sat at the table, she was right. The rickety chairs somehow held our weight. I explained how we got to the farm, even though I would have rather turned myself into the patrol than tell such a cute girl the unbelievably stupid mistake I made. So you see, it was all Gore's fault. Marv folded his arms across his chest again. I disagree. Stasha looked at me from across the table with glinting eyes. I think what he did was brave. He yearned for something, and he wasn't afraid to pursue it. Another pair of wings joined the others in my stomach. Brave was the last thing I expected her to think of me. So why did you run away? I asked. She grunted, her expression sour. I just couldn't endure it anymore. The rulers, the way they manage Middleton. She shook her head. It's illogical and I can't stand it. What are you talking about, man? Marv's nostrils flared. Crap, I knew that look. He was climbing towards his spitting state. The Battlelux family takes care of us, make sure everyone's doing their jobs. Middleton's a great place to live, and you know it. She let out a scornful chuckle. You must be joking. You can't do a single thing you want. You can't choose what job you'd like. You can't raise your own child, even if it's only for a couple of months, or live where you want. You're not even permitted to keep any VOs for yourself for power's sake. And for good reason, man. A spray of Marv spit flew across the table. There he goes again. Stasha leaned back in her chair, lips curled in disgust. Everybody just can't be doing whatever strikes their random fancy all the time, Marv said. There'd be no order. We wouldn't survive a minute without the way Middleton's set up. Again, I disagree, Stasha said. I think we all could have more freedom if we put our heads together and pondered the notion, but the rulers would never permit us to attempt such an endeavor. They're too stubborn in their vast mansion with their unjust rules and precious VOs. She gritted her perfect white teeth, which shone bright against her dark gray face. And they have everyone brainwashed with that absurd tournament of prestige and other incentives. Other incentives? What did she mean by that? Still, I hadn't thought of it that way. Sure, I'd always hated life in Middleton, but like Marv, I always figured nothing could be done about it. Maybe Stasha was onto something. Maybe there could be a way for everyone to have more freedom while the town was kept running smoothly at the same time. Marv's face grew to a dangerous shade of red, so I said, So you left because you got sick of it all? Partly, Stasha said. After all, I wanted my own house, my own things, my own life. I had to at least try to obtain them before I died. Goosebumps sprouted on my arms. She was just like me, except I had to see the mansion and its valuable objects before I died. She turned her head toward me, bore her gaze into mine. But it was a month ago, when I gave birth to, our children. That catapulted me over the edge. She shifted her attention to the table and slumped her shoulders. What? Children? I jumped from my seat. I gave birth to twins, she said in a low voice, though I didn't know their sexes. I clapped a hand to my forehead. Mother of precious power. All this time I've been thinking about my kid when I actually had two. That's amazing, I murmured. I know, a miracle really. She looked up, her face flushed, eyes teary. This was obviously hard for her to talk about, but I couldn't help but think about how she gave birth a month ago. So that was how old our babies were. It really felt like way too much time without being able to see them. Them. I had twins. I paced in front of the kitchen table. This is all so much to sink in. I took a deep breath and looked at Stasha. But you were saying about how giving birth sent you over the edge? As difficult as it was for her to talk about, I had to hear the rest. That's correct. It was just so horrific. A couple of tears trickled down her cheeks, so I shifted my gaze to where it looked like a few heavy VOs had once rested against the wall. Their outlines were engraved in the floor. No sooner had I laid eyes on our first child, than the razors, they took the precious little baby away. Then they told me the next one was coming, and as soon as I gave birth to that one, they snatched it away as well. She choked that last part out. I kept my gaze glued to the wall, though my own throat started to burn. I wasn't permitted to hold either of them, she said. Not once. In fact, as I essentially told you, the razors wouldn't even tell me their sexes. I simply could not tolerate that. It was one thing to not have my own VOs, but... She let out a sob. I've got to admit, until now, I hadn't even thought of it from the girl's point of view. It was awful not to be able to ever see your own kid, but it had to be downright horrific to give birth, especially to two babies, not to mention actually seeing them, only for both of them to be brutally wrenched away. I glanced at Marth. He lowered his head, gazed down at the table. At least he had enough dignity for that. I tried as hard as I could to acquire the babies on the spot, she said. While a razor carried the second infant out the door, I attempted to jump from the bed, but a couple other razors restrained me. I clawed at them like a rabid raccoon, but it was a worthless endeavor. Once I quieted down, finally, the razors told me I'd exhibited natural behavior for a mother, that before long I'd get used to the concept that I cannot ever be with my children, that the terrible pain would eventually melt away. Her voice turned flat, but I didn't believe them. Not for a millisecond. How come? Marth asked, eyebrows narrowed. I had the feeling he believed the razors and thought Stasha had acted impulsively and not in the right frame of mind. Well, though the older girls I'd met at my mansion never spoke of the day they gave birth, I always... Wait, mansion? I asked. You lived in the winner's mansion? It seemed like it couldn't be true, that I was sitting next to someone from a faction that had won the Tournament of Prestige and got to live in the winner's mansion for a year. Not to mention got a tour of the ruler's incredible manor. Priceless. She shook her head. Positively not. I'm referring to one of the manors for girls when they turn 16 years of age. What? Now Marth squawked. Girls get to live in mansions the last year of their lives? Why, yes, Stasha said. With other girls, that is. It's not like they get a mansion all to themselves, but they're allotted to one when they turn 16. Probably because by then most girls have completed puberty and are suitable for pregnancy. You wouldn't fancy them supply or game hunting, or carrying out any sort of regular faction tasks when they have highly delicate babies in need of nurture growing inside them, would you? Marth mumbled. I guess I never thought of that. Me neither, I said. She tisk-tisked. Well, I'm not surprised, given how strictly separated the sexes are kept. Anyway, servants take care of us girls in the manors. I imagine the mansions are a sort of incentive for girls our age to stick around and give birth. Incentive? There was that word again. Weird, Marv said. Yeah, I said. We weren't taught in our nurture factions that pregnant girls got to stay in mansions, but the rest of the girl factions compete in the Tournament of Prestige, right? Correct, Stasha said. How many points a 16-year-old girl's faction had accumulated in the tournament over the course of that girl's life determines which manor she gets. One of the lesser precious ones, or one of the more precious ones with superior amenities. Amenities? I turned the word over in my mouth for the first time, though I was pretty sure I knew what it meant based on how she used it. Now that I thought about it, I've been able to understand most of her fancy words based on the context she supplied for them. Like what? Such as larger bedrooms with bigger beds that have more plush mattresses, more beautiful gardens to roam about at leisure, superior games in the entertainment room. I could go on. However, I imagine that's part of the incentive to compete hard in the tournament of prestige when you're younger, to try and gain a more precious manner for when you turn 16. She might have been onto something with the whole incentive thing. Maybe some of the other factions, like the Nurture or Patrol factions, didn't work just because their members were so passionate about what they did. Maybe that was just what the rulers taught the rest of us. Maybe, in reality, the rulers also promised Razors and patrol officers that they'd live their 16th year in a priceless mansion or something, as long as they did their jobs their whole lives and didn't commit LYN, of course. So the games in your mansion, Marv said, they're better than the ones in your old faction? Oh, far superior, and such variety. Her eyes grew a couple of degrees brighter. After playing nothing but chess and backgammon back in my regular faction, I was utterly appalled by how much more fun games can be, and how different. My own eyes must have appeared misty as board game boxes and little game pieces that looked kind of like backgammon and chess, but were shaped slightly differently danced in my head. In any case, Stasha said, I'm getting off topic. After speaking with the older girls in the mansion, before I gave birth, that is, I sensed a terrible grief in them that nobody I ever met possessed. It was even present in their eyes. After I gave birth, I knew precisely how they felt. Her voice quivered as she said that. Terrible. Just terrible. Marv looked down at the table again. That was the reason why a couple of days after I gave birth, when I was back in my mansion, I decided I had enough and that I ought to leave and attempt to find our twins. After dark, I took my backpack, threw into it some VOs from the mansion I was positive I'd need, and got out of there. No doubt about it, you had to have some serious guts to do that, although I probably would have done the same. After going through what Stasha did, how could you not defy the rulers and try to find your kids? I'm surprised they let you keep your old backpack, I said. I would have thought the new girl at your old faction would have been using it. Oh, right before I fled, she said. During the time my old faction usually ate dinner, I snuck from my mansion across town to my faction, slipped in through my bedroom window, and pilfered it. A mischievous grin snuck onto her face, and I couldn't keep from smiling. She was just like me, sneaking all over the place when she wasn't supposed to. I felt the smile slide off my face, except unlike me, she didn't get caught like a complete moron. They let you walk right out of your manor? I asked. And back in, for that matter? Nobody guards the place. In the evening, most of the servants go to the ruler's mansion where they read and enjoy entertainment even more superior than my manors. Whoa! Why couldn't I have been a servant of a mansion of 16-year-old girls? I take it that's their incentive to serve our manor. Anyway, I assume the rulers don't think anybody would ever leave our manor, considering its amenities are far superior than those of our old factions. Marv grunted. Look, I'm very sorry about you losing your babies, both of you, I really am. But clearly I'm stuck in this stupid farmhouse with two psychos with last year neglect. He clasped his hands together and looked at the ceiling. Oh, precious power, please don't tell me I'm next. I'll do anything, man. I'll shave my head, and when I hit puberty, I'll even shave my ball. So I'm guessing you didn't find our twins, right? I asked. So awkward to talk about, but I had to ask. No, she said in a low voice. I set up camp at this farmhouse because it was nearest to the suburbs. That way the travel time would be as brief as possible for my nightly journeys to and from the Nurture factions. Why didn't you just stay at the mansion and try to find the twins at night? I asked. You know, since it was easy enough to sneak out. Too risky, she said. Chances are somebody would eventually discover my absence, or happen to witness me on my way out or on my return. Plus, had I been fortunate enough to recover the babies, where could I have taken them? Surely not back to my mansion, and I craved more than anything, still do, mind you, to be with them for as many waking seconds of my life as possible. Her voice cracked as she said that last point. I could only nod, a longing feeling digging into me. All good points, and I felt the same way. Not that it mattered much, I suppose, she said. I discovered quite quickly how impossible it is to find the twins. Hopeless as a matter of fact, especially considering that they're likely in separate Nurture factions. Yeah, I knew that feeling all right. Looking at all those babies, who all looked the same for the most part, in that nurture faction made it painfully obvious how impossible it was, and that was just one nurture faction. The thought was too depressing to dwell on, so I said, "So you've been here for a month?" "That's correct," she said. "So how'd you survive so well?" I asked. She was certainly in great shape, in more ways than one. "Before I departed my mansion," she said, "I learned all I could about growing tomatoes from Hilgra." Right. Stasha had been a supply hunter like me, if I remembered correctly from our short conversation at the reproduction faction. She's the manor's food manager. A servant. I knew I wouldn't have a hydroponic greenhouse out at the farms, and she had enough rudimentary knowledge to assist me. Elementary knowledge? Marv asked with cloudy eyes. Rudimentary, Stasha said. Sorry, it means fundamental. Metal? Marv asked. Basic, in other words. She rubbed her forehead. I apologize. Using such big words, it's truly becoming a habit of mine. In any case, Hilgra wasn't the least bit suspicious of me. The mansion servants are a bit more lax than the average faction member, to say the least. The very fact they even told us they have access to the Battlelux family's mansion's priceless VOs shows that much. Weird, I said. Why are they so lax? Honestly, I think they enjoy their lives much more than the average Middleton citizen. Therefore, they have much more of a carefree attitude. After all, they get to live in the 16-year-old girl's manor as well, and have access to all the Battlelux family's priceless VOs. Plus, they likely figure us girls are so content with our new mansions, after such a dreary life of the dull old factions, that they no longer consider us a threat to society. Therefore, they're privy to let slip loose whatever happens to be on their minds, or let slide anything that would otherwise be considered suspicious behavior. I nodded. Made sense. So that's your garden outside, right? Well, my attempt at a garden. She let out a chuckle, but it died quickly. However, I must admit, I didn't think too far in advance. There are scarcely any tomatoes left now because of the cold, and I'm a game hunter. Marv straightened in his seat and pounded his chest. Here we go. And a real good one, too. We'll survive easy with me around. As annoying as he was, it was a good thing he mentioned that. Anything to try and convince Stasha to join us. That's superb, Stasha said, despite the frown on her face. Though that's not what disconcerts me the most. Why? Marv screwed up his face. What disconcerts you the most? I held back a chuckle. Even though I'd never heard the word before either, it was definitely not quite the one she used. Well, yes, she said. We'll have enough food thanks to you. My heart soared at her including us. Maybe she will stick around after all. But the imminent winter's the real issue. It'll be freezing and we don't have enough layers of clothing to stay warm. Even I don't have enough. It's something I didn't consider until I got here. The hay won't even do the trick when we sleep, trust me. The fireplace, I said. We'll start a fire to stay warm. Stasha shook her head, expression downturned. The farms are too close to the suburbs, so they'll witness the smoke. I didn't consider that until I got here either. I just stared at her across the table. Marv sagged his crossed arms into his lap. It couldn't be true. No way it could possibly be true. After all he and I had been through, a jailbreak and barely escaping the patrol, we were going to die anyway.